What's up everyone? Thank you for joining me for another video. So today Angelita and I are on a job. We have a park outdoor setup for a gender reveal and the colors are pastel pink and pastel blue. The color combos in the description, all the material is going to be linked down below. So check that out and let's get started. Alright, so here we are, inflating our first clusters together. We're using 11 inches and 16 inches here. You're going to twist your quads together to make 4, and then you're going to twist your quads together to make a cluster of 8 balloons. Again, it doesn't matter what sizes of balloons you use. Sorry guys, it's very sunny. I usually don't look like this, but it doesn't matter what sizes of balloons you use in your clusters. It could be all 11 inch, it could be all 16 inch, but I would recommend to always use a combination of them. Always have at least one 16 inch and at least one 11 inch in your clusters, unless you're making an immensely smaller or a very large cluster. So here we are on our tarp, of course, because you don't want the balloons to pop and you sometimes don't want to sit on the ground either. And you always want to have, for these outdoor installs, a long extension cord to power your inflator in case you can't sit right beside the outlet. And you want to have your big outdoor bag that has all your 260s, your fishing line, and your scissors in it beside you too. So once you've done 2 of these clusters, basically what you're doing is you're reaching your hand in there and you're pulling one of the necks that looks the loosest to you, or that feels the loosest to you, and you're basically tying the necks of one cluster to the necks of the next cluster after it. People say, how are you doing it? How are you tying them together? All I'm doing is I'm reaching my hand down in there, and you'll see close-up shots of what I'm talking about, and I'm just tying them together. And yes, it does look that strong. I'm not using fishing line or 260. I'm just reaching my hand down there, picking the longest neck that I have that's right from the center, not some loose neck from the side or from a duplet that's like sticking out from the cluster. From the strongest center of the cluster, I try to pick the loosest neck and try to tie it together. And that's how my garlands develop their strength, really. And you should be able to hold it over your head like that with one hand and not have the clusters just flopping around. And that's how you know you're doing a good job, basically. So if you do have 2 people on the team, or you could do this the night before, but we were really strapped for time. So you would have one person inflating and one person doing the detail work. So one person inflating, as I call the bare bones, which is the 11 inch and the 16 inches of the garland, and one person doing the detail. So the little 5 inches, 3 inches, and the 9 inches of making the garland. So I'm inflating this big 3 foot, I'm inflating it fully to 3 feet. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take out the inner neck, because again, when we tie these big 3 foots, or really any double stuffed balloons, we don't need to tie both of the necks. We only need to tie the inside neck. So now that I have the inside, I'm going to stand up regretfully and try to decide where I'm gonna put this 3 foot. So it really doesn't matter because I need to fill out quite a bit of space. So looking at this drape that we're gonna be putting this on, it's quite wide. So I'm gonna be needing to make this garland wide. See what I'm trying to do? I'm trying to go into the center of the cluster, and I'm taking the neck of the inside of the 3 foot double stuff and I'm just tying it. Tie it once, good, pull it, tie it twice. You can tie it to the neck of an existing cluster, like over there you could tie it, but I choose to tie it to itself. And then it just nestles in. Just like that. So move the balloons out, tie it in, and move it back. And look, it's strong. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't flop. Yes, you can use fishing line. Yes, you can use 260s to go in and lasso after. But if you just tie properly, then it's just going to tie well altogether. It's just going to hold well, basically. So what I'm doing right now is I'm inflating the orbs because I need to finish the top. The garland is going to be going on this drape in the background, which you're going to see in a second, and the drape is high. So we need to put the top up first. Usually I start the garland at the bottom, but this time I'm going to start at the top because the drape is tall. So now I'm putting the orbs on a 260 because that's the easiest way to put an orb on. You can use glue dots, you can use whatever you want, but if you don't like where you put this orb, if you use a glue dot and you rip it off, you're most likely going to rip the balloon. If it's on a 260, you could just cut it off, and guess what? You have 2 ends on that 260, so you actually have 2 chances to tie it somewhere. So here I am, basically overhead shot, looking at where I want to put this orb. And I like to center my orbs around the 3 foot. So I like to put them nestled, not right in front of the 3 foot. This is kind of like the main styling tip here. And what I want to show you here is that when I tied that 260 onto that orb, I had two ends. What I did was I didn't tie both ends into the garland. I actually tied one end into the garland, and as you can see here, there's one end that's still free. Now that's that tricky end that you can put a spare balloon on, you can put a little cluster of 5 inches on, you can even put another orb there if that's your style, or put some flowers there. My point is, always leave yourself little bits of 260 so that you don't have to constantly run and cut half a 260 to attach somewhere. If you know that there's a little bit of a hole and you have a 260, then you have the opportunity to tie something there to hide the hole. So my little tip is always leave a bit of the 260. All right, so moving on. After you're done attaching it like that, you should really be able to hold the entire thing up on its own, still with the 3 foot with the orb. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the length, the desired length that you need at this point. Now it's going to be going across the drape, and it's basically a little bit over 9 feet, I would say. So we're trying to make it that length, make it fill up to that length. And as you're going lengthwise with your clusters, you also have to be going widthwise with your 3 foot. So once again, I'm inflating that 3 foot, and again, I'm going into the center of the blue cluster there, and I'm tying right in. That neck is only the neck of the 3 foot blue. It is not both of the 3 foot necks, it is just one neck. And see what happens here sometimes, and it happens to everybody, is that sometimes the neck tears. Just because it may have been a damaged balloon, maybe the tear was already there but you didn't feel it. Sometimes these tears, they happen. And what happens when you have a tear like that, if it's too big and you notice it immediately, then that's a bad thing. But if you have a tear and just as I'm holding it up, nothing's deflating, you actually can't hear anything. I just felt a little bit of a latex tear on that 3 foot. So I'm gonna show you later how to fix that little tear. But before, you know, I'm just saying this now because I'm doing voiceover, but I actually didn't even notice that little tear then. I only noticed that there actually may have been a little tear later. So I'll show you how to do that later. So I'm attaching it on now. Again, my 3 foot. Only the inner necks one more time. And I'm attaching it onto the 3 foot itself. Again, and here it is. So now for that necktie example, I'm gonna go around all the 3 foots and I'm gonna be tying these Qualatex, well I say Qualatex, but you can use any 11-inch balloon and tie it around and above the 260 tie and not of the 3 foot. It's not for leaking balloons. You could do this for healthy balloons too to prolong their life. It just is an extra barrier to make sure that the air doesn't basically come out of the balloon. No, you can't use this technique on foil balloons or orbs. You can only use this technique on 3 foots. But again, for outdoor balloons, especially, you know, with birds landing on them or walnuts falling, like those things are sharp. So you always want to make sure that there's just an extra bit of protection there. On these orbs though, if anything falls on them, they're a goner. And they're like $8 a piece. So these things are very expensive. I'm very gentle with them. Usually I like to inflate orbs all the way on the inflator, but with this thing I was like, no. No, let's just be careful. So as you can see, inflate all the way till there are no seams, or try to get it that way. You know, sometimes you'll have 3 lines that have no seams and then 1 line has a seam. Again, here's a close-up of me tying in the orb with the 260. You just roll it in, but don't roll it all the way past that pink point. Only roll to the silver point, because past that pink point, there's a valve in there, right? And we don't want to damage that valve because that's what leaks the air out. So you only want to go on the silver part. You'll want to tie your 260 in, and you only want to tie in one end of the 260 to have the other end available for you to, again, tie on a cluster or a little 5-inch or whatever florals. So I tied that in. That's my garland currently. And what we need is we need a little bit more blue because it's looking pink. So we need a little bit more blue there. Angelita's on that clusters. We're inflating the 3 foots. Again, Angelita's working on length. I'm working on width of the garland. So I have my 3 foot again, and I am tying the 11-inch around the necks of the 3 foot around all of them. So now it's chunking up. Now you get to basically see that the garland kind of moved from the width of one cluster to now the garland's about 4 feet in width. So now that we have the length and the width for the top, we need to start securing it. So this is the drape. right? This is what the drape looks like. The drape was already there when we got there, so we had to work with it. So this is us trying to work with it. And us trying to work with it, I already had some sort of a bad feeling about this. Not to say that anything was off, it's just that the proportion of the drape threw me off. Like the drape was too low for when the balloons went on, it just seemed like it was so top heavy and it was so long at the top that when it goes down to the side, I feel like it wouldn't have looked very elegant. Or maybe if the drape was higher, it would look more proportionate. I just had a really hard time like picturing it up there because that's how I intended it to be. Like when I drew the picture before, when we talked to the client, like that's how I thought it was going to be in my head. But then seeing the drape day of, setting up, I was like, I'm not sure about this. And to be honest, this is the point where Angelita like put it up and I was like, yeah, let's do it. This is what we planned. And I'm like, does this look good? Does this look good? And then I finally went to the client and I was like, listen, I think it would look better if we actually took this garland and we put it to the sides because the drape is so long, like it's so wide, that it would be great if we didn't block off the top and kept the top open so the eye goes from the sides to the top rather than chunk off the top and make everybody look like they're standing under something very heavy, you know, and blocking. So I decided to put it kind of on a side, like a little half garland on the side, but then it looked empty, right? You can't just put it on one side, then you have to do one on the other side too. So that's the second part of the video, making the second part of this basically. So here Angelita's just tying to the corner. On these drapes there's little holes that you have up there. You can run your fishing line through that and then link it through to your balloons. I would not recommend to ever link it through a 3-foot or an orb. Try to go a few times through a cluster of 11 inches or 16 inches or a combo of both, but try to not go through the 3-foots basically. So you need to link it up in 2 places at least, right? One at the top, one at the bottom. And this is possibly the cutest moment ever, by the way, when the client's first child or any child ever walks up to me on a job. I just have like a whole baby moment to myself. So here I am realizing there's a second part to make. So here I go making these clusters in the heat. I don't even know if we're allowed to have the Gatorade bottle there in the shot, but here we are. That happens too, by the way, when you're trying to tie clusters, they go so tight together that sometimes they just bounce off of each other. So try to use your own body and try to use your arms to push the clusters towards each other so your hands actually, or your fingers particularly, actually have the opportunity to tie rather than hold down the balloons and tie them. So here I am. Mega inflating. This is real time. This is almost not even sped up that fast, but realistically, I'm working on the base and body again, and Angelita is on the plinths. The plinths are ghost plinths, and let me give you guys a little tip here. It was dewy that day. It was kind of like rainy in the morning, and the grass was still wet. So when you put acrylic plinths down on grass, they're gonna fog up. So they're gonna look a little bit not a little bit, very foggy. And honestly, you can kind of see it happening here, but they're flipped the other way around. You're gonna see it later in the video. My tip there is to wipe them down and hold them upside down for as long as you can, and put a little rock so that there's air traveling through the ghost plinths if you're gonna have them outside. So here I am. Almost done the bare bones, as I say, the 11 inch and the 16 inch, and finishing up the length because it's looking a little short. And then after the length is done, I'm just going to chunk it up with the 3-foot and then start plopping up the orbs. Really, it's really the same thing, no matter what you make, whether it's a half garland going up top, only a garland on the sides, it's really the same thing. You're making the body first, so you're making the skeleton that's going to hold the other accent pieces. And by accent pieces, I mean the 3-foots, the orbs. You're making the 11 inches and the 16 inches as tight clusters as possible, nestled into each other. And you know, some people, they leave very loose necks and their clusters don't hold like this, so they can't just pick it up and transport it like that. And if that's the case, then I guess your next objective would be to get your clusters nice and tight, because it's really not that hard. Just get a bag of balloons and practice really hard. It's the same thing as people who pick up guitar, right? You need to have calluses on your fingers in order to play. No matter how long you play, you're still going to have those calluses. So unfortunately, it never gets easier, but you just get used to it. And it's not that bad after a couple of years of doing it like every weekend. It's not that bad. So here I am putting up the other side. Honestly, I'm liking it. but I'm liking the shape way more than it was, but I'm just not loving it right now. And especially what I'm not loving is the STD 16-inch. And yes, you heard me right. They are from Bargain Balloons, and that's what it says on the bag. So that's why I call them that. The STD white that I stuffed the pink into for the double stuffed pink, those 16 inches, they look a little white. They look much more white than the double stuffed 11-inch pink. And that's another thing I have to say. Whenever you're using outdoor balloons, you have to keep in mind that it's a thicker latex. So if you think you can stuff like regular Qualatex balloons and then another brand of balloons, sometimes it may be a different shade of pink. And you'll be like, whoa, why do the 5 inches or 11 inches look way different? So here, the 36 inch, the 5 inches, and the 11 inch look pretty similar to each other altogether, but the 16 inch really stand out. So that's why always be careful about what brand of balloons you're using, especially for the outside balloon, because that's the balloon that really matters. So here we are attaching the orbs, kind of moving through the garland. Here I just want to say, by making that decision to change the garland from going across the top and onto the side to just both on the side, we didn't actually end up using any more balloons. We ended up using the exact same amount of balloons we would have used for it going along one side. But what I think this did is it created a focal point. Because really, the question is, and really the photos are all going to be geared towards the center of this backdrop. So our objective as decorators is to make sure that our work doesn't take away from the moment. And the moment here is to create a really nice photo backdrop or video backdrop for this event, right? So it's always on us to advise the client if we see that there may be a better version of something. So that's something we should always keep in mind, is that it is always on us that if we see that something can be done better, let's do it better. So now that we're doing the little details, now that I have the structure to where I want it to be, I want to start doing the main focal details like the florals, because flowers, they take up a lot of space. Some people think, well, I'll just finish the garland balloons totally and then I'll add the flowers in. Well, guess what? If you finish the garland, then there's most likely nowhere to stick the stems in. And if there's no bigger holes to stick the stems in, then you're probably going to pop a lot of balloons in the process, and then your garland starts to flop a little bit. So you have to be careful with that. Whenever you're doing any type of flower work, or look at how many stems are in there. It's quite a bit of stems, and what I'm doing is I'm taking the 260, I'm wrapping it around the stems, and I'm just taking all of those stems, tying off the 260, taking all those stems and just pushing it right into the garland. So I'm finding a crevice and I'm finding somewhere where it could be. But before I do that, I'm really annoyed by this orb. This big orb, I liked it on the right side, but I don't know, something about it made me want to put it at the top of the left side. And I was like, do I put it up front? And they're like, no, don't put it there. So I was like, here, Angelita, where do you want me to put it? Where does it look good? And finally, we chose a spot up there. And honestly, once I put it up there, I was much more happier with the look overall. I know it's not balanced right now, but in my mind, I was like, yes, the left side is getting there. The right side still needs a little love, a lot of love, but it's getting there. So I'm putting up these flowers, and immediately once I put those flowers there, I kept them there. But again, in my mind, I was like, those flowers are way too close to that 3 foot. The flowers should have been between the 11 inches, not that close to the outside of the garland, because focal points are accessories, and they're almost great and dangerous in a way because they draw the eye. So sometimes when you have a boring garland and you have a little bit of florals, that's what really makes that boring garland bring it up to that luxury level garland. But sometimes you overdo it, or maybe you put flowers in the wrong spot so it draws the attention to the wrong place in the garland. So what I'm saying here is always be mindful that what you're doing adds to the total effect and doesn't take away. And honestly, you could have done a lot of things. You could have played around with it. You could have made this garland instead of color blocking, and by color block I mean go from blue to pink to blue to pink. You could have chosen to go sporadic, so every cluster would have some pink and some blue balloons in it. You could have chose to do it that way, and that would have ended up in a different style look. You could have chose to put gold orbs or silver orbs, and that would have chose like fully changing the look. You could have put no flowers and put Japanese bubbles on there, or crystal pastel bubbles on there, and that would have changed the look. So what I'm saying is, this is just a basic example of how you could do a simple pastel pink and blue look and jazz it up just a bit with the right accent of orbs and florals. But really changing one of these things, like even adding white, would change it entirely and it would give it a totally different look. And I think if white was a part of this, honestly, it would take away a little bit unless this look got very big, like in a wall aspect or something. I think white would have taken away. I prefer to have the blue and pink together alone. And honestly, for blue and pink, I love the rose gold. I don't love the gold because I think it's a little bit too yellow. It kind of turns primary, like the blue is blue, the pink is red, and the yellow is yellow, or the gold orb is yellow. So with the blue and pink, I'd always recommend the silver. Unless it's a Disney theme, then the gold is perfect. So again, I'm moving around those flowers. I'm just not very happy with them. So whenever I'm not happy with something too, when you're on a job and you're against the clock, be careful because you may be caught up on doing something for too long or finessing one part of the garland for too long. Always keep an eye on the time and make sure that you're moving according to time. Sometimes just say, okay, I have 5 minutes to solve this problem, to put the flowers into this part, and go and set a timer for yourself. And once that timer is up, move on. Because sometimes something that would take you 20 minutes can take you 2 minutes. You know what I mean? And sometimes it's about when you do it, really. So always make sure that when you're doing something, you're in the right frame of mind, especially when you're doing something creatively. Here, I'm just using double-sided tape to put up the orbs. I'm finding a great place to nestle it in, so honestly, I don't even need the tape. The tension between those balloons is good enough to hold the orb, but I personally like to put the double-sided tape just to be sure. And you just hold it in place for a few seconds and it's good to go. So I like to really orb it up, and sometimes I like to have my orbs touching, and I never like to have, my little trick here is I never have orbs that are really big touch really small ones. I have like the medium touch the small, or the large touch the medium, but never go broad sizes across because I find that it just looks cuter that way. And another thing is that I would never put an orb too close to the end. So I'd never put an orb at the very, very end, or I've never put a 3-foot at the very, very end. And as we're doing these blue flowers, I take the tip of that flower 260 and I actually put in some 5 inches. So you can save some 260 and also save some time. Always be mindful that you need to fill up your garland. Just because you're done the bare bones or the 11 inches, 16 inches, and 3 foots, that's basically saying you're halfway done. Everybody thinks, but it's almost done. It's basically all inflated. Yeah, all inflated means barely there. Then the real work starts of detailing it and putting on the orbs and styling it. That's where the real time consumption part kicks in. So now we're starting to have the host setting up the tables on the sides. So the flowers are up, the bare bones are done. I'm starting to work with the 5 inches and the orbs, still placing them in after I'm done flowers because I needed to make sure that the flowers were in before, because the flowers take up the most amount of space. So as you can see, this is a good example of the ghost plinths, us trying to prop them up so that they can air out before photos. We put balloons in there, but they fogged up and you could barely see the balloons. So we propped them out of there and we decided to just let them air out for a bit. So that's what I meant by fogginess of the plinths, of the ghost plinths particularly. So because I have a really big orb on the left side, I need to balance it on the right side too. And I don't want to put it at the bottom. I need to put it at the top because visually that's just like where it needs to go, but it just can't go exactly where the one on the left is. And I like that the one on the right, the top on the right, has a little and a medium one in it and then a big one. I feel like it's a nice transition, and it also evens out that gap between the 3 foots on the right, that top pink 3 foot and then the middle blue 3 foot. It just kind of fills the gap between there. So now that I have secured the bottom, like where I want it to be, I'm going to go back with my fishing line and secure it to the drape rod. Do you see those florals in the back? Imagine if I had a very thick, dense garland. Those stems would have nowhere to go. So that's why you need to do florals when you have the garland 50% completed. That is like my little takeaway to you. Always do florals before if you're doing a heavy floral look. Now, if you're going to be putting like 2 or 3 flowers in there, you could do it whenever. Honestly, it doesn't matter. But if you need a 260 in there to make sure that your bunch of flowers holds in there, then you got to do it when the garland is not completed. And once it's tied in there, if it's not perfect, don't worry about it because you can always go back and rearrange it because the 260, it's holding it in there. So here I am finishing off the pink. You want to make sure that the accents, again, are near each other, meaning the florals are near the orbs or they're a fair distance away from each other. So you don't want to have too many flowers too close to each other and you don't want to have too many orbs. Again, unless that's your look though. So right here, I'm happy with it. It's looking symmetrical to me, more or less. And what I want to do now is fill out that bottom. So it's looking like the left is looking good, but the right needs a bit of help on that bottom. And I'm going to be adding that cluster that Angelita just inflated for me of what looks like all 11 inch, but they're inflated to about 11 inches, the biggest balloon. And then I'm looking at about 8 and 9 inches there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reach my hand down and then I'm just going to tie it off to the bottom. And sometimes this double-sided tape, you know, when it's humid, when it's very dewy outside, it's hard to work, but you just keep pressing in there. You make sure there's no dust on the balloon, no talcum powder, and you should be good to go. This is the cutest thing ever. The best parts of the job, right? So here I am finishing off the little last bit of pink that I want to add to the bottom of the left. Angelita just finished off that second cluster for the right. And before we add them in, I'm actually going to tie those two clusters together. And then I'm going to tie off the clusters into the right of the garland. You could leave the garland like that, but I mean, it's not really touching the floor, and I like the base to be just a little bit more filled out. Already, in my opinion, I love the base when the base is almost like half the garland. To me, it's like a bed of balloons and flowers and orbs, so it's very pretty. But sometimes when it's a lot of grass and prickly things, you need to keep the base off the floor as much as you can, so this would be the case for that. And here I am just filling out the little crevices between the 3 foots with my drips of 5 inches and 9 inch balloons. Again, all tied to 260s, but if you don't want to risk your 260 being seen, you can always use fishing line. And again, that is also linked down below, but I like to use anything basically above 10 pounds. But 10 pounds is a very thin line. If you want a little thicker line, then I would suggest 25 pounds and above. That's quite a bit of a thicker line. So you saw that little hole between those little 3 foots of the blue and the pink? That's what that little orb does. It just secures that space so it thickens out the center of the right garland. So now I'm just adding the final bits. I always say I'm almost done. Okay, I promise just 2 more minutes, and then 2 more minutes turns into 20 more minutes. And then I say, okay, I'm finally done. And then Angelita goes, are you happy? Are you finally happy? And I'm like, yes. And this is when I'm finally happy with the look. And this is the final look of what it looks like. And honestly, we did this all in like 2 hours. Prep work was basically 5 minutes in a car, and the rest was done all on site. And that is it. For this whole order, the drape was not ours. The plinths were ours, which we rent out. I'm going to write the pricing down below. And the garland as well, the pricing for the garland. But what I would say is charge fair. The pricing for this garland, the cost material in Canadian dollars is $283 with all florals included. So this is only the material cost. This does not include labor. This does not include delivery or what we charge the client totally, but this is just the cost for the balloons alone. So if you want to replicate a look like this, you would have to also pay within the realms of just under $300. So how much you sell this look for or how long it would take you is, again, depending on how long it would take you to make this. But I would say on average, if you're a beginner, budget 5 hours for this. If you're intermediate, budget 3.5 hours for this, and if you're a pro, budget 2. Because realistically, we were in and out. If the inflation plug wasn't that far away and we didn't have to run back and forth, then we would be in and out in an hour 45, hour 30 tops if it was a studio or a banquet setting. But because it's outside, you always have to assume that you're going to be running after your clusters and tying them as you're running after them. So that's something you're going to have to keep in mind whenever you're working outside. So just know labor and time that it's going to take is almost gonna take double. So with that look, thank you for joining me for another video. I hope you guys liked it. Please let me know if you have any questions, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much for everyone who's watched these videos. It's amazing. I never thought we'd be getting the views we're getting, or that anyone would be watching my little Toronto small town balloon garland videos. So thank you guys so much, and I can't wait to be making the next one. This one we literally filmed and did for an event yesterday, and we have another one coming up next week, so I can't wait to share the final look of that one. So until then, bye guys.